Zest here. Grant and Colfax, the dynamic duo. The election of 1868, where the freshly bloodied republic, still picking shrapnel out of its hair, handed the reins to Civil War hero General Ulysses S. Grant, a man whose military genius was matched only by his ability to look perpetually like he'd just smelled something foul. His running mate? Speaker of the House of Representatives from Indiana, Schuyler Colfax, Jr., a man whose name sounds less like a politician and more like a prescription cough remedy, and whose political legacy is, fittingly, about as memorable. Grant, freshly minted from winning the Civil War, and with whiskey still reportedly on his breath, was unanimously nominated at the Chicago Convention, an event so choreographed it made ballet look like rugby. Their campaign slogan? Let us have peace. Charming. Meanwhile, the Democrats countered with their own rallying cry, let us have white supremacy. The people, in their infinite wisdom, chose Grant and Colfax by a landslide, 214 electoral votes to 80, thanks in no small part to the newly liberated black voters who, in a delicious twist of irony, were the very people Democrats feared would usher in Negro domination. The South, as always, was learning the hard way that karma has a sense of humor. Unfortunately, after the newly freed African American men in the South voted with gusto, the system found creative ways to prevent them from doing it again for about 100 years. But that's another story. But here's where the tale gets interesting. Both Grant and Colfax had been personally invited by Lincoln himself to join him at Ford's Theater on that fateful Good Friday in 1865 to celebrate the Civil War's grand finale. A presidential invite, a post-war gala. Shakespeare, who could possibly refuse? Sadly, both, in a stunning happenstance, had prior engagements. On the night the great emancipator was shot in the head with a single-shot pistol, both the soon-to-be president and vice president were mysteriously, inconveniently, otherwise occupied. Now, declining a presidential invitation in those days was like refusing to clink glasses with the Pope. Unthinkable unless you had a very good excuse. And what were their excuses? Grant, the great war hero, initially accepted, then, at the 11th hour, backed out with an excuse as limp as a damp noodle. His reason? He and Mrs. Grant had to catch an evening train to New Jersey to see their children. A touching family reunion, to be sure, except that the logistics made no sense. A 6 p.m. departure from Washington would have gotten them to Philadelphia late at night, where they'd then have to twiddle their thumbs until morning for a connecting train. Why not just leave the next day? Did his children spontaneously combust if not seen before dawn? Why the mad dash, unless they really didn't want to be in that theater? Colfax, meanwhile, claimed he couldn't attend because he was leaving for the Pacific coast the next morning. A noble journey westward, a grand adventure, except, oops, records show he didn't actually leave until May. Which means he lied, boldly, to the President of the United States, who, tragically, didn't get the memo, what with being assassinated and all. His trip, a multi-month stagecoach odyssey that would later be immortalized in Our New West, a book so thrilling it could cure insomnia, was clearly planned well in advance, a substantial undertaking, a multi-month journey with notable traveling companions. So why lie? Why not just say, Mr. President, I'd love to, but I've got a book to write about stagecoaches, Indian massacres, and dysentery, and I heard they plan on killing you that night. The whole thing stinks like 3-day-old fish. Here we have the two men who would succeed Lincoln's administration, Grant as president, Colfax as vice president, both suddenly, miraculously unavailable on the very night Lincoln would be shot. Neither could spare a single evening to bask in the glory of Union victory with the man who made it possible. Neither could adjust their schedules, even slightly, for what was essentially a national celebration. Coincidence? Or did they know something big was about to go down, something best observed from a safe distance? History, of course, prefers the tidy explanation. They just had other plans. And thus, in a twist worthy of Greek tragedy or dark vaudeville, the president walked into his doom without his general, without his speaker, and without a decent excuse. But history, like a bad detective novel, often leaves the juiciest clues lying around for those who care to look. And in this case, the question lingers. Why were the two most powerful men in Lincoln's political future so eager to be anywhere else that night? Anywhere but there. Perhaps they simply didn't like plays. Murder, mayhem, and Mary. Todd Lincoln. I recently wandered into one of those intellectual rabbit holes where dusty history meets theatrical melodrama, and I emerged with a curious gem, a lecture titled Death of Abraham Lincoln, delivered by Walt Whitman, poet of pomp and circumstance, in 1879. Whitman, that bard of democracy, had a peculiar bond with Lincoln. They both adored the theater, soaking up the same garish spectacles powered by gaslight and overacting. On occasion, they even sat through the same performances, two solemn heads among a sea of top hats and rustling programs. One wielded poetry like a cudgel, the other, presidential pardons. It was a time when everyone took themselves very seriously, and so naturally, they ended up at the theater. Lincoln was fond of the theater, Whitman tells us, with the satisfied tone of a man who's just spotted the president in the nosebleeds. I have myself seen him there several times. I remember thinking how funny it was that he, in some respects the leading actor in the stormiest drama known to real history's stage through centuries, should sit there and be so completely interested and absorbed in those human jackstraws, moving about with their silly little gestures, foreign spirit, and flatulent text. There it is, pure Whitman. Whitman wasn't at Ford's Theater on that apocalyptic Good Friday in 1865, though I suspect if he had been, we'd have a poem titled Leaves of Brain Matter. Instead, he patched together eyewitness accounts, the 19th century equivalent of Twitter threads, but no bots, less fake news, and a lot more ink. Through the general hum following the stage pause, with the change of positions, came the muffled sound of a pistol shot, which not 1/100th part of the audience heard at the time, and yet a moment's hush, somehow, surely, a vague, startled thrill. And then, through the ornamented, draperied, starred, and striped spaceway of the president's box, a sudden figure, a man, raises himself with hands and feet, stands a moment on the railing, leaps below to the stage, a distance of perhaps 14 or 15 feet, falls out of position, catching his boot heel in the copious drapery, the American flag, falls on one knee, quickly recovers himself, rises as if nothing had happened. He really sprains his ankle, but unfelt then. And so the figure, Booth, the murderer, dressed in plain black broadcloth, bareheaded, with full, glossy raven hair, and his eyes like some mad animal's flashing with light and resolution, yet with a certain strange calmness, holds aloft in one hand a large knife, walks along not much back from the footlights, turns fully toward the audience his face of statuesque beauty, lit by those basilisk eyes, flashing with desperation, perhaps insanity, launches out in a firm and steady voice the words, Sic Semper Tyrannis, and then walks with neither slow nor very rapid pace diagonally across to the back of the stage and disappears. Had not all this terrible scene, making the mimic ones preposterous, had it not all been rehearsed in blank by Booth beforehand? Recall, Mary Lincoln was seated beside her husband, recently shot point blank. She then watched Major Rathbone, poor soul, attempt to tackle Booth and get rewarded with a stab wound so ghastly it turned the box into a butcher's window. Major Henry Rathbone and fiancée Clara Harris shared the presidential box with the Lincolns. Their box was a slaughterhouse. But no screams, no sprint for the exit. Help was a heartbeat away. They played their parts with a silence that'd shame a Zen monk. And then, Pandemonium. Only after Booth's vaudevillian exit, only once the assassin had vanished into the wings with a sprained ankle and a flair for Latin, did Mary Lincoln, pale as death, lean out and wail, a moment's hush, a scream, the cry of murder. Mrs. Lincoln leaning out of the box, with ashy cheeks and lips, with involuntary cry, pointing to the retreating figure, "He has killed the president." Just like that, the curtain lifted on a new, realer drama. And still a moment's strange, incredulous suspense, and then the deluge, then that mixture of horror, noises, uncertainty, the sound, somewhere back, of a horse's hooves clattering with speed. The people burst through chairs and railings and break them up. There is inextricable confusion and terror. Women faint, quite feeble persons fall and are trampled on. Many cries of agony are heard. The broad stage suddenly fills to suffocation with a dense and motley crowd, like some horrible carnival. The audience rush generally upon it, at least the strong men do. The actors and actresses are all there in their play costumes and painted faces, with mortal fright showing through the rouge. The screams and calls, confused talk, redoubled, trebled. 2 or 3 manage to pass up water from the stage to the president's box. Others try to clamber up, etc., etc. The perfect American spectacle, equal parts tragedy, confusion, and the kind of absurdity that makes one wonder whether the gods were directing a satire. The question lingers like cigar smoke in an old theater. Why the delay? Why the silence from Mary and Clara in those crucial moments? Why in blazes did Mary Lincoln and Clara Harris sit mute as mummies through this bloody spectacle? One's husband's brain drip-dropping, the other's fiancé slashed like a side of beef, and not a peep until the villain exits stage right? Only when Booth, that preening assassin, takes his bow with his Latin catchphrase and struts off, does Mary find her voice. Clara? Not a squeak. Suspicious? It's the kind of plot twist that'd make you wonder if they were in on the act.